The centerpiece was a poinsettia I had bought myself. I remember that detail now, and I don't know why it stays with me the way it does. Maybe because everything else that Christmas belonged to someone else. The noise, the plans, the opinions about what we were eating and when, but that poinsettia was mine. I had picked it up at the grocery store on the way home from my last physical therapy appointment, the one where doctors store on the way home from my last physical therapy appointment, the one where Dr. Okafor told me my hip was healing better than expected for a woman my age. I was 67. I felt like 50. I carried that plant in one arm and my purse in the other, and I set it right in the middle of my kitchen table, and I stood back and looked at it, and I thought, this is going to be a good Christmas. I had not had company in the house in almost 2 years. Not since my husband Gerald passed, and even before that, the holidays had gotten quieter. The kids were grown. They had their own lives, their own traditions, their own way of doing things. I understood that. I had told myself I understood that. So when my son called in November and said he and his wife wanted to bring the grandchildren down to Tennessee for the whole Christmas week, I felt something open up in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. The whole week? I asked. The whole week, Mom. Kids are out of school. Thought it'd be nice. I said it would be more than nice. I started planning before I even hung up the phone. My son's name is Caleb. He's 41. He works in logistics, something with supply chains that I have never fully understood, but that seems to pay well. His wife is Simone. They have 2 children, a boy named Eli who is 9 and thinks everything is either awesome or stupid, and a girl named Haley who is 6 and follows her grandmother around the house asking questions about everything she sees. I love those grandchildren the way you love something that surprises you every single time. I spent the 2 weeks before they arrived the way I always do when family is coming, cleaning things that were already clean, buying food I wasn't sure they liked anymore, moving a chair 3 different places before putting it back exactly where it started. I made up the guest room with the good sheets. I bought a little step stool for the bathroom because Haley was still small. I found a board game at the thrift store that I thought Eli might like. I also, because I am a woman who plans ahead, went to the grocery store with a list I had been building since October. A proper Christmas dinner. Turkey and a ham both, because Caleb had said once that he preferred ham, but I couldn't remember if Simone felt the same way. Sweet potato casserole, green beans with almonds, cornbread dressing made from my mother's recipe, the one written in her handwriting on an index card that I keep in a plastic sleeve in my recipe box, pecan pie, and a chocolate cake. I spent $412 at that grocery store. I did not think twice about it. They arrived on the 22nd, a Sunday afternoon, and the house filled up with sound the way a house does when children walk through the door. Haley found the poinsettia immediately and asked if she could touch it, and I said yes, gently, and she touched one leaf so carefully it made me want to cry. That first evening was everything I had imagined. We ordered pizza because nobody wanted to cook after the drive, and we sat in the living room with the Christmas lights on, and the kids fell asleep on the couch, and Caleb carried them upstairs, and I thought, yes, this is what I wanted. The second day was fine too. A little busier. Simone had opinions about the kitchen. Not unkind opinions, just the kind that assume you've been waiting for someone to update your systems. She reorganized my spice cabinet while I was in the other room. I noticed when I went to get the cinnamon and found it somewhere new. I didn't say anything. On the 23rd, Caleb mentioned that he'd been doing some thinking. We were at the kitchen table, just the 2 of us, Simone upstairs with the kids. He had his coffee. I had mine. It felt like a normal morning, the kind where a person might say anything at all. He said he and Simone had been going through some numbers. He said the house was a lot to maintain, and had I thought about what my plan was, long term. He said it gently, the way you say something you have rehearsed. I told him I planned to stay right where I was. He nodded like I had said something to be patient with. And then he moved on to talking about Eli's soccer league, and I let him, but something had shifted in the room, and we both knew it, and neither of us said so. Christmas Eve was when the cooking started in earnest. I had been on my feet since 7 in the morning. The dressing needed to go in early. The ham needed to be glazed. I had a system, a timing chart in my head that I had run through 100 times, and it worked, because when you've made Christmas dinner for 30 years, you know exactly what you're doing. Simone came downstairs around 10 and stood in the kitchen doorway in a way that didn't quite become helping. She said the cornbread dressing smelled a little heavy. She said she'd actually brought some ingredients to make a quinoa stuffing, something lighter. She pulled a bag out of the cabinet under the counter. She had put it there herself sometime in the past 2 days without mentioning it, and she set it on my counter next to my mother's recipe card. I looked at that bag. I looked at my recipe card. I said, "I've been making this dressing for 40 years. She smiled the smile of someone who has decided that patience is a virtue they are performing. "Of course, Ruth. I just thought it'd be nice to have an option." Ruth. That is my name. Ruth Eleanor Calloway, née Patterson, born in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, October 4th, 1957. Retired occupational therapist. 38 years married to Gerald Calloway. Homeowner. Gardener. Grandmother. Woman who has made the same cornbread dressing from the same recipe card since 1984 and does not need an option. I moved the bag of quinoa to the far end of the counter and I went back to my dressing. Dinner itself was fine. The food was good. Mine was, anyway. The quinoa stuffing sat mostly untouched because the children weren't interested, and Caleb ate 2 servings of the cornbread dressing and didn't say a word about it. Simone ate the quinoa stuffing and complimented it in a voice that was half directed at me. I thanked her for making it. We cleaned up together. The kids went to bed. We sat in the living room and watched a Christmas movie none of us had seen before, and by 9:30 Caleb and Simone had gone upstairs too. I sat alone in the living room for a little while after that. The lights were on the tree. The poinsettia was on the kitchen table. The house was the quietest it had been since they arrived, and I realized I had been slightly holding my breath for 3 days, and I hadn't known it. I thought I was tired. I went to bed. It was the 26th, 2 days after Christmas, when I found it. Caleb and Simone had taken the kids to a movie, some animated thing Eli had been asking about since October, and I had stayed home because my hip was bothering me a little and honestly because I wanted 2 hours of quiet. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat in my chair. I thought about starting the leftovers into a soup. I was walking through the living room when I noticed Caleb's laptop bag had fallen over on the couch. A folder had slid out partway, paper showing. I picked it up to straighten it and slide it back in, the way you do without thinking. But the paper had a letterhead on it that I recognized. I recognized it because I had seen that exact letterhead on the forms Gerald and I had filled out 15 years ago when his mother was diagnosed with early-onset dementia, and we helped her get her affairs in order. It was a Tennessee conservatorship petition form. I set down my tea. I sat on the couch in my own living room, in the house Gerald and I bought in 1989, in the house I had painted and replanted and repaired for 35 years. And I read the document. It was preliminary. That's what I kept telling myself at first. It's just preliminary. It's just research. He probably just looked this up. He probably doesn't even know what it is. But it had my name on it. Ruth Eleanor Calloway. Proposed protected person. And there was a section, handwritten, his handwriting, Caleb's handwriting, that I have known since he was 7 years old, learning to write in cursive, that listed concerns regarding independent financial decision-making and property maintenance capacity. My house, my money, my name. I sat there for a long time. I did not cry. I am not entirely sure why, because I am a woman who cries at commercials and at the end of library books, and whenever Haley tells me something she learned at school, but I did not cry then. I felt something go very still inside me, the way the air goes still before a storm, and I sat with that stillness and I read the document twice more. Then I folded it neatly, put it back in the folder, put the folder back in the laptop bag, and put the bag back the way I had found it. Then I went to my bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought about my mother. My mother was a woman named Dolores Patterson, and she died at 82, still in possession of every single one of her faculties and most of her stubbornness. She used to tell me that the biggest mistake a woman could make was to let other people decide she was finished before she decided it herself. I thought about that. I thought about the spice cabinet, reorganized without asking. The quinoa stuffing on my counter. The comment about my long-term plans said gently over coffee, like I was a problem being managed. I thought about the way Simone said, "Of course, Ruth." Not "of course, Mom," the way Caleb called me, but Ruth, like I was a client, like we were in a meeting. And I thought about 38 years of grocery lists and school pickups and saving and scrimping and going without so that Caleb could go to the University of Tennessee without debt, so that he could take a year after graduation to figure himself out, so that when he and Simone got married, we could give them a real wedding, even though Gerald and I had to move money around to do it. I thought about the check we wrote them for the down payment on their house in Atlanta, the money we sent when Eli was born and Simone took a longer maternity leave than her job covered, the Christmas gifts every year that I budgeted for in September. I thought about all of it sitting in my quiet bedroom, and then I made a decision. Not an angry decision, not an angry decision, not a dramatic one, just a decision, the kind that arrives quietly when you finally stop being afraid of it. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else. I made coffee. I looked at my poinsettia. I fed the cat. I have a cat named Biscuit who is old and opinionated and does not care for house guests, and we had been having a lot in common lately. Then I sat down at my own kitchen table with my own laptop and I did a few things. I called my financial advisor when the office opened at 9. Her name is Wanda, and I have known her for 12 years. And when I told her I wanted to move my accounts, I did not explain why because I did not owe anyone an explanation. She handled everything efficiently and kindly and told me everything would be completed within 2 business days. Then I called my attorney. His name is Howard Parks, and he has an office on Church Street. And Gerald and I used him for the house closing and for both our wills. And I trust him the way you trust someone who has only ever told you the truth. I told him I needed to update some documents. He said he could see me on the 28th. I said I would be there. Then I called my friend Loretta, who is 70 and the sharpest person I know, and I told her everything, and she listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. And when I was finished, she said, "Ruth, I am so sorry, and I am so proud of you." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "I think they're leaving tomorrow." She said, "Good." Caleb and Simone and the kids did leave the next day, the 28th, as planned. The morning was normal on the surface. I made breakfast, eggs, toast, the good orange juice. Haley sat in my lap for a few minutes before they loaded the car. Eli gave me a hug that was mostly distracted but still real, the way 9-year-olds hug. When Caleb hugged me goodbye, I held on for a moment longer than usual. Not because I was angry. I want to be clear about that. Not because I hated him or had decided to cut him off or was calculating some revenge. I held on because he is my son, and I remember the weight of him when he was new. And I remember the year he was 12 and we almost lost him to a bad illness that turned out to be fine, but was terrifying for 8 days. And I remember watching him walk across the stage at graduation. And none of that disappears. But I was done subsidizing my own diminishment. That is the only way I know how to say it. I was done making it easy for someone to decide I was finished. I met with Howard that afternoon. We updated my will. We talked about a power of attorney, a real one I chose, with terms I understood and a person I trusted to carry it out. We talked about the house and the accounts and what protections made sense for a woman in my position. He said, "Has something happened?" I said, "I've gotten smarter." He smiled at that. He didn't push. 3 weeks later, Caleb called. I think he had expected the holiday to accomplish something. I'm not sure exactly what. A signature, maybe. A conversation I wasn't supposed to know was being planned. And when nothing happened and he came home empty-handed, the silence must have felt different than he expected. He called on a Sunday evening and we talked for 20 minutes about nothing much. The kids, his job, the weather in Atlanta. And then he said casually, the way people say things they have been thinking about for a while, Mom, I was thinking maybe we should talk about some financial planning. Like, together. Get everyone on the same page. I was quiet for a moment. I said, I've already taken care of that. He said, what do you mean? I said, I mean I've already taken care of it. My accounts, my will, my power of attorney. Everything is in order. Silence on the line. Then, with who? With Howard. And with Wanda. Same people I've always trusted. More silence. And then, Mom, I just want to make sure you're protected. I thought about that word. Protected. The way it was shaped. The way it was supposed to sound like love and did almost, except that what I'd seen in that folder wasn't protection. It was reclassification. It was taking a woman who had run her own life for 67 years and filing paperwork to say she couldn't be trusted to keep doing it. I said, I know you do. And I am. I'm protected. He tried one more time. He said maybe we should all sit down together. Him and Simone and me. Go over things. I said, Caleb, I love you. I am your mother, and I will always be your mother. But I am not a situation that needs to be managed. I am a person, and I've got it handled. I let that sit. He said, okay. I said, give those babies a kiss from me. He said he would. That was 4 months ago. Things are different now and also the same in the way that things are when something shifts underneath the surface without breaking everything apart. Caleb calls on Sundays. We talk about the kids. We talk about the weather. There is a careful quality to our conversations now, a distance I didn't create, but I don't feel responsible for closing either. Simone sent a birthday card in January. It was polite. Haley FaceTimed me last week to show me a drawing she made of a cat. She said looked like Biscuit. It did not look anything like Biscuit, but I told her it was perfect and I meant it. I do not know exactly what Caleb told Simone happened. I do not know what version of events they have settled on to explain why things feel different. That is their business. People find the story that fits the outcome they need. My version is simpler. I still have the poinsettia. That surprises people when I tell them, because poinsettias are not supposed to live past January, but mine has. I keep it by the kitchen window where it gets light in the mornings. Most of the red leaves have fallen, but there's still green, still growth, still something working its way forward. I think about my mother a lot these days, the way she never let anyone decide she was finished before she was ready. The way she died at 82 with her name on her own accounts and her own house and her own will, written exactly the way she wanted it. I think about the moment I picked up that folder from the couch cushion. I think about how close I came to just straightening it and sliding it back in the bag and never reading it. I think about what might have happened next if I had been a different kind of woman. More trusting, more reluctant to cause discomfort. I have spent a lot of my life being reluctant to cause discomfort. I am trying to spend less time like that now. What I know is this: I worked for 38 years. Gerald and I built something together, and when he was gone, I kept building, even when it was hard, even when I didn't know if I could. I made sacrifices I would make again because I did them with love. But love is not the same as permission. Giving to your children is not the same as giving yourself over to them. I am not a resource to be managed into someone else's plan. I am Ruth Eleanor Calloway. I woke up this morning and made my coffee and sat by my kitchen window and watched the light come up over my backyard, the one I have been tending for 35 years, the one with the rose bush Gerald planted the spring before he got sick, and that has come back every single year without fail. It came back this year too. I think I will go out and check on it this afternoon, maybe cut a few things back, get it ready for spring. There's a lot of spring still ahead of me. I intend to be present for all of it. I used to think that love meant making things easy for the people you loved. I spent decades operating on that belief. If Caleb needed something, I found a way. If there was a gap, I filled it. That's what mothers do, I told myself. That's what it means to show up. What I understand now is that there's a difference between showing up and disappearing. And for a long time, I've been doing both at once. Showing up for my son while slowly disappearing as a person with her own standing, her own judgment, her own right to be taken seriously. The conservatorship form didn't come from nowhere. I know that. It came from years of a dynamic I had helped build. One where I said yes, often enough that my yes stopped meaning anything. Where I gave freely enough that the giving started to look like obligation. Where I stayed quiet about enough things that my silence started to look like consent. Caleb didn't invent the idea that his mother needed managing. He had been watching me manage myself into a smaller and smaller space for years, and at some point he simply decided to formalize it. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. Not his betrayal, exactly. My own participation in the conditions that made it feel possible to him. But here's what I also know. Understanding how something happened is not the same as accepting that it should continue. I could see my part in it clearly and still decide that it ended with me. That is not contradiction. That is just what it looks like when a person finally starts paying attention. What Caleb did required a particular kind of courage to ignore. The courage to look at a document with your own name on it and not explain it away. I almost did. I almost put that folder back in the bag and made dinner and told myself I had misread it, that it was something innocent, that my son loved me and therefore couldn't be doing what it looked like he was doing. Love and harm are not mutually exclusive. I had to learn that at 67 years old, standing in my own living room, what I chose to do afterward was not revenge. I want to be honest about that. Moving my accounts, updating my will, calling Howard, none of that was about punishing Caleb. It was about refusing to be a problem that someone else got to solve. It was about deciding that my competence did not require anyone's confirmation. I had spent 38 years building a life with Gerald, and 11 years since maintaining it on my own, and I did not need a petition filed in my name to tell me whether I was capable of continuing. Loretta said she was proud of me. I've thought about that a lot. Pride felt like a strange word for just doing what I should have been doing all along, but maybe that's exactly what it deserves. The things we should have done for ourselves long ago, the things that required us to finally stop being afraid of our own authority. I think about the women who will hear this story and recognize something in it. Not necessarily a conservatorship form, but the quieter versions, the reorganized spice cabinet, the gentle suggestions about long-term plans, the way a grown child starts talking to you like you are a situation instead of a person. The small erosions that happen so gradually you don't notice until you reach for the cinnamon and find it somewhere new. Notice. That is the only thing I would say. Notice early and don't talk yourself out of what you're seeing. You built your life. You are still living it. Nobody gets to file paperwork on that.